When we look at a parent's ability to stop and reflect on what's happening, especially as it relates to their child in that moment, they're able to make better decisions about how to respond. Kids feel that, and the impact of that, those cumulative effects of that kind of emotionally unavailable parenting where children don't feel psychologically safe with their parents is traumatic. It absolutely is traumatic. And so for parents to really just learn how to flex that muscle, how to work it out, and begin to think about what's going on, wonder a lot. Gee, I wonder what's going on with them. I wonder why she's doing that. And what do I need to do? How should I respond? Because I can promise you, if I responded to my kids the way I really wanted to, it would not be pretty. And if you don't have a solid foundation within your home to really have conversations about what they're seeing, what they're reading, and how they're being influenced, they can really take a wrong turn. So again, we come back to family communication. How involved are parents in knowing what their children are looking at, how they're thinking, spending time with them, and really opening up those conversations. And it's hard to do.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle podcast. Now, today is going to be an incredibly important episode because I am sitting down across from the president and CEO of the Florida Center for Early Childhood. Now, Kristie is an expert in this space because she spent 30 plus years of experience as a mental health professional. We're going to talk about the changing landscape of early childhood mental health. We're going to talk about some ideas like technology and how it's impacting our society. We're also going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about the changing structure of our community. We're going to talk about the role of early intervention and research in shaping future generations. And then we're really going to kind of take a deeper dive into Kristie's story. Kristie, welcome to the show.
Oh, hi. I'm so glad to be here talking about something I love so much. So it's an honor.
My question for you to get started is, anything that is work-related is out of bounds. Okay. How would the person who's sitting across from me right now be described?
That's you, I think.
No, the person sitting across from me in this digital table. So my guess, the person.
There's nobody sitting across from me.
In this digital landscape of what we're doing right now across the digital table, how would Kristie be described? Work is out of bounds.
See, I'm so literal. How would I be described? Oh dear. So I have to think about how others would describe me. Cool under pressure, probably, is a good listener. Yeah.
Why cool under pressure?
Why cool under pressure? I don't know. I think I have it's a superpower that I've not always been cool under pressure, but I tend to get into my zone when I'm problem solving, right? I tend to just go to let's figure this out. The sky's not falling unless it literally is. There's nothing that we've ever been through in our lives that we haven't gotten through. We can figure this out, right? So I just, I think it's probably my temperament. I don't know. But my staff joke and tell me that I probably go home. I must go home and take it out on my husband or my kids or something because they don't know where it all goes to, but that does not happen.
I was sitting across the table, this virtual table, from another leader yesterday. Her name is Portia James, and she is the CEO and founder of a company called Behavior Genius. And we were talking about the character traits of a leader, right? Especially somebody who is a CEO. And often we look at challenges from the outside as things that we have to overcome, but great leaders look at them as opportunities. Now, when we think about the opportunities that are in front of us, when we're talking about serving childhood mental health, what is the biggest opportunity that your organization and the work that you do is trying to solve?
Wow, you asked some really good question. That's a good one. It's a big one. We're just trying to ensure that children that need our services, whatever those are, because we have a lot of services, young children, that they have the best start, that they have the best opportunity to be their best selves, whatever that looks like for them, and to give their parents the tools to be able to support them. So we have a lot of parents that show up with their own histories and backgrounds. That's really important in early childhood mental health because young children can't make changes unilaterally. We require, and it's absolutely necessary, that the parents be a part of the whatever the treatment plan is, whatever is decided jointly that we recommend, right, to help children. They have to be a part of it. And part of that is deciphering and kind of unpacking what their story is. What did they bring to the table as mom, as dad, as grandma, as foster parent, as whoever. So once we unpack that, there's a lot of parent work that's involved. So it's easier said than done in many cases, but we want to make sure the family is set up and that these kiddos have the best opportunity to be their best selves. They're going to be the ones taking care of us at some point. So
there's a really powerful lens of accountability that's in that, right? Because when I think about where we come from, we have so many stories that we've overcome, we've buried within us, we've tried to ignore. But often later in life, I think it's easy for a lot of adults to understand that the experiences that we have when we're a child, the traumas that we've been through, often have a way of coming out of us, and we're imprinting those projections or those ideas on little ones. Mm-hmm. Is that correct, or what are we talking about here?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Our past, what we've experienced in our life, is not way back there, right? It's with us. We carry it with us every day, and if we can't connect to that past and see how it's impacted us, it's going to be hard for us to parent. I don't think many parents I've grown to learn that, if adults are in relationships with one another, that's easy to understand. But then to think about us being in relationship with our child, right? That you're bringing two people together, and when you have kids, you get what you get. You don't really get to tailor, decide what you're getting. And sometimes there's mismatches, there's temperament differences, and if we have our own story of abuse, neglect, whatever that may be, it's going to impact how we raise our child. So it's really important for parents to reflect on that and really buy into that notion that who we are and our experiences impact who we are as parents. And it's an honor that parents trust us, trust me, trust our staff to support them in the journey to help their child.
Is it sometimes surprising when a family comes to you and says, we're looking to support our child, right? They're having some mental health issues, some complications. And then you kind of say, okay, but in order to first understand what's happening with your child, we have to go back to kind of like a first principles perspective and start asking questions like, how do you feel about feelings? Is that kind of like an interesting perspective and dynamic that you have to navigate sometimes?
It is. And setting up that, if we just go into saying, okay, great, now you start telling me about your history, and we don't set it up and help the parent understand how very important their role is, they're not going to understand, well, I didn't come here for me. I came here for my kid, right? And so for us to set it up, this is how this is typically looks, right? We listen, we understand the presenting issues that you sought services for. The way that we navigate that is to really understand you. We want to build a relationship with that parent, get their buy-in, understand who they are, because who they are is really important in relationship to their child. And, with early childhood mental health, and I'm talking about like 0 to 5, that's a really foreign idea to some people. It's a niche, right? And although our organization serves children through elementary school, we have a heavy focus on birth to 5. And when you think about those first 5 years, and I know we're going to get into some of that, but those are critical times in our lives. If we all sat down and looked at our first 5 years of life, a lot of what we know is either because we've been told or we remember some experiences, but it's important for parents to really unpack that for themselves and then look at really the first 5 years and then beyond that. And then now they're a parent, and how that impacts their child. And then kind of, we all like predictability. We like to know what's coming next. So to help them understand that, it really sets it, like, okay, I get this. It's not a surprise that we want to sit down and talk to you and get to know you and unpack your story.
Around 30 years of experience as a licensed mental health professional, I want to know, how did you get on this path? because I don't have a lot of experience talking to leaders like you that have so much experience specifically in an area like this. And I really think it's important for the audience to understand, what were some of your origin stories that pushed us down this path?
Well, I'll tell you, the way I got into early childhood mental health is very simple. A door opened and I walked through it. It was happenstance. I didn't go to graduate school and say, I want to study infant mental health and early childhood mental health. There are now programs specific to that, but at the time I went to school, um, back in the early 90s, there wasn't. It was just mental health. You go to school to get a psychology degree or a degree in counseling or what have you. And so I got my degree, and then I needed a job. I moved down to South Florida, where I am now, and needed a job. And I got a job here, and I never left. And I kind of say you get bit by that early childhood bug, and you see there's so much opportunity with the young ones. You can really change their lives forever. You work with the first 5 years, and you can change five generations. I mean, that's really that. It's that simple. And so I just never left. I started absorbing it and really getting, honing in my skill and my niche. And I knew that I wanted to help people, but I didn't really know in what capacity, whether it's marriage and family or adults. I just didn't know. But and most clinicians don't. When they get out of graduate school, they just want a job and they don't really know what area. Some do, but a lot of them don't. They land somewhere, and this is where I landed, and I'm very grateful for it.
I love the fact that we're talking about getting ahead of the problem. And I feel like, especially in you being in South Florida, right? I have an interesting question about like culture. And I want to use myself as kind of an example of this. So I came from a mixed family. My father is Black, my mother is white. And it's very interesting to see how those two different cultures approach topics like mental health. In my mom's family, she came from a solid foundation, a household with a mom and a dad, an older brother and a younger sister, a child of three, didn't really struggle for things, and didn't have a lot of complications when it came to her family members experiencing mental health issues. My father's side, a completely different story. The other side of the tracks was drug abuse, was an inconsistent home, was terrible examples of what family members were doing, getting in trouble, going to jail, death, all this different type of stuff. And often the conversation about mental health was, we don't talk about those things outside of the household, or that is how your Uncle Terry is. That's how they are. That's just how he is. So how do we navigate some of those cultural differences when we're talking about an early childhood mental health issue? Do we ever come across any type of cultural conflicts? And then how do you navigate some of those conversations as well?
Culture is hallmark. It is a part of the conversation from day one. If I'm sitting in a room with somebody that looks very different than me, or even if they look like me, but they have a religion that's very different than mine, whatever the cultural differences are, those have to be addressed and noticed right away. We don't want to just kind of not acknowledge those things, right? So if I'm sitting in front of a Black woman or a Black man, a mother, father, and I'm going to notice that right away. Like, I'm a white woman, right? And I know that a lot of Black people have been, they feel like the systems have worked against them. They have biases against people that look like me. I want to acknowledge that and make sure that it's not something that is just kind of, I'm too afraid to broach that topic. And, someone like me, it's taken time, right, to kind of get to that comfortable space where I can say that. I mean, it's been a while, but I'm absolutely comfortable now. But I think, getting past the discomfort and just saying, we're different. And I want to make sure that you're comfortable with me, and that there are things that, you can teach me. And your perspective is really helpful in understanding. I mean, culture is huge. I mean, we have cultures where you don't speak about feelings. It's a sign of weakness. And you don't talk about those things. You just pull up, just pull up your bootstraps and keep pushing. And if that's a place that you're coming from, I need to honor and respect that. But I also want to I want to poke at that a bit, right? And challenge some of those thoughts, because children all need the same thing. All children. It doesn't matter where they come from, who their parents are, what religion they are. They all need the same thing. They need to be heard. They need to know that their emotions matter. And if you have a mom or dad that doesn't have feelings about, they have negative feelings about feelings, then their emotions are not going to matter. They're going to tell them to quit crying. They're going to tell them to quit being scared. There's no monsters. That, children need to feel like they're understood and that their emotions are valid. So we poke at that, and it takes longer sometimes, with some families where you really have strong cultural beliefs. I was just on a call yesterday with a group of clinicians. I do some consultation work around the state, and there was a case presentation on a family from Haiti where that lives in South Florida, and they have really strong cultural beliefs that you do not talk about mental health. You don't talk about your feelings. You just keep on moving. We're not talking about that. And so it's real, but it's, you got to name it to tame it, if you will. Right. And so when you speak the unspeakable, you talk about things that are uncomfortable. People realize that are sitting in front of you. They realize you have hands that can hold anything. You can hold the hardest of conversations and be supportive and understanding, even if it's something that I personally don't agree with. And that's why the mental health field requires something called supervision, because we're humans helping humans. And I have feelings, right? I have biases. I have families that may frustrate me. I have, beliefs about certain things. And if I feel whatever I may be feeling, or if I get to a place where I'm stuck, I need to be able to process that with someone and for them to challenge me about my biases, my beliefs, wonder more about why something might be happening, why I might be feeling a certain way, so I can be the best I can be for the families.
This is great. Because this is churning up a whole bunch of, I would say, almost like intuitive feelings that I have. One of the things I talk about here on the podcast is I have an extreme responsibility to continue to push my family lineage forward. My great-grandfather was a sharecropper in Arkansas. My grandfather, born in the United States in the 1930s as a black man, was discriminated against for the color of his skin. My father came from a broken household in a family structure that was not consistent, but took it upon himself to take a risk, become an entrepreneur, and put me in a position to do things that none of them could ever imagine. And when I think about look at that explosion, it's perfect.
I love it.
When I think about the elements of safety that have come along with each generation, we were struggling previously just to make it by and just to be safe in the places where we lived. Now, one of the things that I think about is like one of the last strongholds that we have to overcome as heart men is the mental health blocks and the stories that we carry from generation to generation. And I want to make it my personal mission to protect my children from some of the same stories and experiences that we've had. And a large part of that comes with an understanding of why I do certain things, why my father acted in a certain way, and unpacking all of that so I don't pass along those subconscious examples, if that makes sense. And I just love that we're having this conversation, because I feel like the pandemic especially, right, created a conversation around mental health more so than ever, maybe an awareness, but now we're in the position where people are willing to do the work that is necessary to, I would say, untether from all of these invisible chains that continue to like drag us down as families. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah. What you're sharing is wisdom, right? Of and reflection on what's come before, and knowing what your family history is, what your lineage tells you, and not kind of just suppressing some of it or pushing some of it down, but also looking at how hard your family has worked to get to where they are, and the benefits that you have reaped because of that, right? So, there was a study years ago called the ACEs study, which you may have heard about, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, and when we think about ACEs, and your ACE score, right? It tells you what your risk factors are, but it's not a determination of who you are, right? It's not, it doesn't tell you like, oh, you're doomed, man. You got all these adverse factors. You're really screwed, right? It's information that is powerful. Hey, I have all of these adverse experiences. My health is at risk because of these adverse factors. So what can I do to get ahead of that? So knowledge is power, and we can shift move the needle in the right direction if we have knowledge and we're willing to to do something to make sure that, or do our best to make sure that we are heading in the right direction.
I was listening to a podcast the other day, and this guy was talking about the biggest form of evil in today's world is ignorance. When we truly seek to understand and we understand any type of conflict, if that's with ourselves or with somebody else, if you truly understand the person or the adversary on the other side, it wouldn't be as easy for you to be as malicious. And when I think about how we kind of demonize and stigmatize our feelings, it's very easy to be malicious to those feelings because we don't truly understand them and they are scary. And I feel like this entire process in itself is like an awareness exercise that helps us break down those misconceptions and barriers to truly understanding the motivations behind our behavior. I want to talk a little bit about a term called reflective capacity. Can you talk about this and let the audience know kind of what this is all about?
Yeah, reflective capacity is one's ability to really just stop and reflect on what the current circumstances are. And sometimes we reflect after the fact, but then once we learn to reflect more in the moment, it allows us to pause and think about all of the variables, right? So when we think about reflective practice, reflective capacity, when we look at a parent's ability to stop and reflect on what's happening, especially as it relates to their child in that moment, they're able to make better decisions about how to respond. When, children, they're going to frustrate us. They're going to do things that we look at and go, oh my goodness, that's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed. We're in the middle of who knows where, and you're acting this way. I'm so embarrassed. In that moment, if we stop and reflect, wow, I'm really making this about me in this moment and my embarrassment. Everyone's looking at me. I need to shift from my embarrassment to what does this child need in this moment? What do they need? And what should I do? And that's, in public, we've all been there. If we have kids, we've all been embarrassed, but also at home in the everyday life, if your child's fussing about, taking the dogs out, or they're fussing about wearing an outfit that you don't want them to wear, or you want them to wear and they didn't like it, whatever, just, how we respond, we've all heard the parents who are yellers and screamers and, they just don't respond in a way that is wise. And they get really big and scary. Kids feel that. And the impact of that, those cumulative effects of that kind of emotionally unavailable parenting where children don't feel psychologically safe with their parents is traumatic. It absolutely is traumatic. And so for parents to really just learn how to flex that muscle, how to work it out, and begin to think about what's going on, wonder a lot. Gee, I wonder what's going on with them. I wonder why she's doing that. And what do I need to do? How should I respond? Because I can promise you, if I responded to my kids the way I really wanted to, it would not be pretty. Right? It wouldn't. It would not be pretty. But, and I, sometimes it hasn't been pretty and I've fallen short and I wasn't my highest and best. But then I can come back and say, you know what? I shouldn't have done that, or I was not okay when I yelled at you like that. I'm so sorry. And I know you really want that, or you really want to do that. Let's talk more about that. So it's, just the concept of thinking and being mindful about what your experience is and what the child's experience is, and really making, it puts you in a better spot to be able to respond in a way that is calm and responsive to your child's needs, emotional needs.
And when we react in a negative way, right, the word that was popping into my head there was emotional regulation, right? When we react in certain situations with certain emotions, those are almost subconscious blueprints on how we react in the future. And a great example of this is me and my girlfriend have currently been together for like 6 years. And when we first got together, we have very different personalities and how we deal with conflict. Now, one of the things that we've discovered in our recent years is we talk about how our parents reacted in certain situations when we were younger. Her parents, very loud, Italian, like to scream, yell to get their point across, right? And when we first got together, that was like a really big adjustment period for me because I was like, why are we yelling in this scenario? And she was like, well, I'm not yelling at you. I'm just yelling to get my point across. And I said, okay, that's interesting. And then we started talking a little bit more about my life and where I came from. My mom, as an example, I do not have more than 3 examples of her yelling at me as a child when I was young. And so whenever I come across conflict or something's happening, I'm always very much like, all right, why are we doing this? What's going on? And when you're in a relationship with somebody who came from a different household, that's a completely different experience and a complete normal reaction in those scenarios. And I wanted to kind of share that story because I don't think her parents could have truly recognized those early examples of how they were reacting by yelling in those scenarios and how it would create that domino effect of reaction later in life from their daughter, which is really interesting. And this is kind of like on the front of my mind because of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. I have to say, we're talking about adult relationships, but I've said before that raising my kids has been so much easier than living with my spouse, who we've been married almost 25 years. I love him to pieces, but when you put two people from two very different backgrounds together, there's a lot of navigating that has to happen. There's a lot of understanding, and we learn a lot about ourselves in terms of selfishness and just the way I operate, the way he operates. And when we have children, well, we have kids, but when the general public, when we have children, it requires us to really think about how we get along and how we raise those kids together. And it can be complicated, under the wrong circumstances, it can be very complicated. But yeah, I mean, you really have to know where you come from and really think about that. And wow, do I want to continue to do that? And maybe, you talked about your girlfriend yelling, and maybe she's not aware, right, that her loud, demonstrative way of getting her point across can be emotionally activating for those around her, right? And so we don't want our children to feel those kinds of things. We don't want that to be just our story. Oh gosh, my mom always did this or my dad always did that. So, I always ask parents too, at some point when we get, several weeks in, maybe even several months in, I ask parents, what do you think your child would say their experience of being parented is?
Ooh.
Right? And so I think about that a lot. Like, what are my children's experiences of being parented by me? If they were to tell someone, what would they say? And I think if we can answer that in a way that we think we're doing an amazing job, that's wonderful. But I think most of us are like, oh gosh, they're probably going to say this or that, and maybe I need to work on that. I want my children, and I think all of us want our kids to leave us going, man, my mom was always this, or my dad was always this, man. And so, it's a pretty reflective, thought-provoking question that a lot of parents don't really stop to think about. They certainly know their experience of raising their child, right? But flip that around.
Comes back to that sense of awareness, right? That sense of awareness, and to be able to audit how we react in certain situations is incredibly difficult. And it's something that I've really tried to get better at as I'm older, is recognizing where I'm at in this present moment. Because when you can be present, it's much easier to have that sense of awareness and that sense of, okay, understanding, right, that we've been talking about. I want to use that as kind of an opportunity to segue into the topic of social media. So social media today, one of the prime examples that I've heard over the last couple of years about the impact of social media is in 2021, I believe it was, there was a documentary that came out called The Social Dilemma. If you ever saw it on Netflix, it talks about how these tools have been engineered by incredibly smart people, not only to keep us coming back and being engaged with these platforms, but to change our behavior over time. And when I think about going back to the earlier statement that we used about emotional regulation, I might have mentioned this in a previous conversation with you, but there's a book called Indistractable. Now, the author of this book talks about how distraction has been implemented into our lives and been anchored in behavior. Whenever somebody feels uncomfortable, whenever we feel bored, whenever we feel awkward, what is the one behavior that people have anchored hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times? It is whipping out our device from our pocket and looking at the screen to get a release of dopamine or escapism feeling. I really worry about the impact of social media on the family dynamic, because it's not just kids who are on their devices all the time. It's also mom and dad. So, what are some of your intuitions, if you will, about the impact of social media on this early childhood mental health, early childhood development space, and the impact on that family relationship?
I was at a meeting this morning with some fellow CEOs, and we had a presenter, someone come and talk to us about self care, and she brought up and said what I'm about to say, and it was like really like, whoa, this is true. She said, I think that these right here are going to be the lead, what lead paint was in our generation, right? And because we don't quite know yet what the future is going to look like when we do research down the road on what this doom scrolling, this relentless scrolling and looking at our phones is going to do to our kids. And that's just one piece of it. And I think, I have teenagers and I think about, yeah, I see them on their phones. When my son is in an uncomfortable space in a group, he's a shy kid. When he's in a group of other kids, he pulls out that phone and he starts, it's like his way of like not feeling alone or not feeling the awkwardness of not knowing what to do in those social moments. And, before phones, we all felt those awkward moments. What did we do? We didn't have a phone to retreat to. Um, I know that for young children, it's not even a anecdotal. It's reality. A lot of children have. We've seen a lot of kiddos have these kinds of behavioral and developmental challenges, right? And we know that of course, the pandemic played a part in some of the developmental delays and mental health challenges that we've seen. But we know that obesity we can contribute to phone usage, brain development, social skills, a number of things, right? Relationship challenges. So we know that phones are, there's good, right? We can use them for good things, like to look up research and to use it as a calculator or a flashlight. And, there are things that we can look up on social media. I mean, on like Google and Safari, but the social media piece, especially in teenagers as they get older, we see a lot of mental health challenges because they're seeing things that are happening. It causes them to think differently about themselves. We also see the influence of some of the things that they're watching, right? When I was growing up, if your parents were conservative, you were conservative. If your parents were liberal, you were liberal. Whatever your parents' beliefs were, those were your beliefs. And not so much anymore. Kids are seeing things and they're being influenced in ways, mind you, without a lot of information, right? It's just a 1 minute little piece or just a verbiage that they might read, and their brains are not fully developed. They really aren't thinking that there's more to this story. I wonder what the other side is thinking, and they're just really being influenced by little things that they see. And if you don't have a solid foundation within your home to really have conversations about what they're seeing and what they're reading and what how they're being influenced, they can really take a wrong turn. So again, we come back to family communication. How involved are parents in knowing what their children are looking at, how they're thinking, spending time with them, and really opening up those conversations. And it's hard to do in today's world where we have hardworking parents and kids that are in school and you're barely getting home after all these sports events and you're throwing something in the oven. It's hard. It's hard to find the time, but we make time for what's important, right?
Once again, I want to go back to that element of accountability, right? If we want to impact the future generations in positive ways, we have to be intentional about how we spend our time impacting this generation. One of the things that I caught a lot of flack for of just being born in 1990 was people said, millennials, you guys are the 8th place trophy generation. And I always like to ask the question, who raised the 8th place trophy generation? Because it wasn't me going into the trophy shop and saying, I need a 7th and an 8th place trophy for these little
Right.
kids who are in a tournament. You know
Right.
what I mean? And I just really worry about the idea of the long-term impacts. And we don't have enough data, but there is some surprising data out there. And I think in our previous conversation, I shared in 2012, there was on average 12% of girls who had major depressive episodes. Now, this is when Instagram and everything social media just starts popping up. As of the most recent data in 2023, 31% of girls are having major depressive episodes. So, how are we not looking at the tools and the environment that are becoming such an integral part of everybody's lives and correlating that data with the spike in mental health issues that we're seeing in such a young generation? What's kind of your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, no, I don't. I didn't know that data, but it's not surprising. And I really don't see anything being done very intentionally, right? Like where if I don't see campaigns, I don't see anything really happening. It's like we all have the phones, we all need them. My daughter's phone is actually right now at the You Fix I Break store getting, and she hasn't had a phone for 24 hours. And you would have thought the world was coming to an end, right? It's like and me too, I can't reach her. So it's like, man, these phones, we really rely on them for so many things, but not having, the Snapchat and the things that teenagers use was like painful for her. And I don't see anything major happening. I see that we're responding to it. I'm sure more kids are on antidepressants. I'm sure more kids are in counseling and therapy. Um, but I don't, yeah, I don't know that we're really doing anything intentionally in the US. And I'm sure that maybe there's somebody listening that's like, I know what's happening and I would love to know what that is. Um, but I think we will see years down the road, we'll see there will be research and we'll see these kiddos, these Gen Zers and millennials that have really been impacted. I think there will be a shift, right? Because it's really heavy, it's really big now, but I think there'll be a shift where it's not that important, like it is now. There'll be a shift. I don't know what it will look like, but I think there will be a shift.
Just like I always thought that my skinny jeans that I have on right now were going to be cool forever. And we're moving back towards like a bell bottom jean, which we came from back in the past. So cycles do continue to repeat themselves, right? I'm even part of a generation where I've had to be incredibly intentional about what I expose myself to. And I have a theory. It's called the mental health diet. So, one thing you don't know about me, and people have maybe not heard this on the podcast before, but when I graduated, or when I graduated high school, I went to a school in South Carolina called Coastal Carolina to play baseball. I got hurt, ended up not playing baseball, lost my identity because that was a huge part of my life, ended up getting into some bad habits like smoking weed and hanging out with bad friends who weren't motivated. I gained 85 pounds, so I was 3 bills plus. I lost a whole bunch of weight. And as I started to get older, I recognized that my fitness journey was tied directly to my diet. It doesn't matter how hard you work out. If your diet is shitty, then it's going to be a bad result. Then I started thinking about all the stresses like the anxiety, the feelings of inadequacy, the comparison, which is so easy on social media. And over the last month and a half, I deleted all those things off my phone other than LinkedIn because I use it for business. And so one thing that I've recognized is I don't have those feelings of comparison. I don't have those feelings of FOMO. I don't have those feelings of inadequacy or those little subconscious feelings that say, well, I should be doing this or I should be posting this when I don't have access to it on my device. Mm-hmm. And I've had to be incredibly intentional about my mental health diet because if I wanted a better health fitness from my mental perspective, I needed to focus on my diet again. What do you kind of think about that idea of a mental health diet?
Oh, I love it. And you found what works for you, right? You found that that social media is absolutely detrimental to your mental health. I would actually agree with you. The same as for me. I'm not a big social media person either. I have them, but I just because of work and I need to promote, the work that we do and push things out regarding to my organization. But I don't post a ton. It doesn't, I'm just not, that's just not, I don't care. I don't think anyone really cares what I'm doing. A lot of people think people care what they're doing, but I don't think anyone really cares what I'm doing or what my kids are doing. So, I do agree with you. There are things that, and you figured this out later on, right? You're in your adult life, you're like kind of analyzing and reflecting on what's going on here. How did I get here? And what are the things I need to do to get back to where I want to be? And I think it probably was a necessary part of your journey, right? You probably grew so much in that experience. And, those are the things that are part of our life that really help us get to where we want to be. And without them, we may not be there. So, being intentional about what you want. And that's where parents can really help. As teenagers, they don't want to listen to their parents, but they are listening. We think they're not listening, but they are. And so even though we may not see quick and real drastic change, they are listening. And when you start to see like, oh, I wasn't invited to this, and look at all these people that were at this party that I wasn't invited to, or they're having fun together without me. How is that helping you? Right? How is that helping you seeing that? In my day, we didn't have that. And we had to call somebody on the phone. And if we didn't reach them, call them at their house. And if we didn't reach them, then we just sat there and waited and hoped they showed up. That's just the way it was.
A simpler time.
A simpler time. Call waiting, though. I do remember getting call waiting. That was a big deal.
I remember caller ID. We had a little a box attachment next to the phone at home so you could see who was actually calling you. You know what I mean? Like those were big steps when I was growing up in the 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
So we've talked about a lot of the macro issues that we're dealing with, right? The accountability, the awareness, breaking generational curses, all of these things that are becoming more and more important. But yet we are still facing challenges when it comes to being a community mental health organization because of things like reimbursement. So anybody who's listening to our conversation today recognizes that you need a ton of resources in order to combat these macro problems that we're dealing with. So what's kind of happening in our communities when it comes to cuts in reimbursement? Because I have a ton of partners who are in the mental and behavioral health space, and they're having to lay people off because reimbursement doesn't support things like child and family services in some of the areas that they're working in. So how do we navigate these challenges from your spot as a leader?
I think it's so different region to region, even in Florida, but across the US, depending on where you live. And I will tell you flat out, we are a Medicaid provider. And what Medicaid reimburses versus what other insurance companies reimburse versus what our hourly rate truly is, it's like 50% of our hourly rate, right? But the reality is it does not cost us any less to hire a mental health therapist with the credentials they require and the training they require. The person with Medicaid gets it. The person without Medicaid gets it's the same therapist with the same credentials and the same amount of training. So, and people that qualify for Medicaid do not deserve any less quality in the services that they get, period. And so while Florida just received a very minor increase in the rate, I think it jumped from like 73 and change to 80 something and change, right? 85, 87, something like that. It's something, but the rate had not been changed since 2004. Okay. We're looking at over 20 years. And you think about, I think about when I started here in 97 and what I was getting paid as a clinician in 1997 was like $27,000 a year versus what we're paying our therapists now in 2024. Crazy. We can't support their salaries and benefits on Medicaid reimbursement. So, like I said, it's different from region to region. If you live in a rural community, there's no way you're going to pay the bills with Medicaid. The way you pay the bills with Medicaid is you overload that therapist with so many clients that they're going to burn out and leave, and you're going to have turnover. So we're fortunate enough in our area to be able to access local government grants through contracted human services with our local county governments in our two, we're Manatee and Sarasota counties. And we have access to a lot of philanthropy. We're very fortunate, and that helps to offset our deficit, quite frankly. But a lot of communities in Florida, I have colleagues all around the state, and they live in very rural communities. They don't have access to philanthropy, people with deep pockets that can really help support the work. So it's very complicated. And so, we have a lobbyist. We talk with our lobbyist about what we need to do. I talk to our local representatives. Yes, we just got an increase in Medicaid rates, but we need more, right? And so we do the best we can to increase our contracts that we have with some of our local providers. But it's a real challenge. It's a real challenge to make ends meet. Absolutely.
It's really upsetting because over the last decade that I've been in the healthcare space, I've heard some terminology come up like whole person health, right? We recognize that you're a human and every element of your humanity, including your mental health, impacts your physical health, impacts your overall health, impacts everything that we kind of see and do every single day. And when we start getting into these ideas of we can continue to cut rates, but the demand in our communities is higher and higher than ever, this seems like a game of insanity, trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I just don't know how we're supposed to get out of this other than leaders like yourself honing the skill sets of curiosity and creativity. How are we supposed to be curious enough to look at every single option that's out there, like philanthropy and donors and being able to raise contracts in certain places to be able to meet the need, and creative to think about how can I use things like technology to help my team be more efficient so they don't get the time of having to document everything and having the burnout process, because it's a really tough game to be in. And so I empathize for leaders like you because you're ringing the bell saying we need help. You're serving people, especially in a population like Medicaid that needs support so much more, because we've all recognized if you're in healthcare that there's other downstream effects that cost everybody more when people are dealing with mental health challenges. I just don't know how we're supposed to navigate these upcoming years unless we get the support that we need for organizations like yours.
And I'll tell you, yeah, I'm with you. um, that I will tell you, since 2020, it has been a real challenge. It's always been a challenge with nonprofits. And I think people that aren't in the nonprofit world, that have never worked for a nonprofit or been on the board of a nonprofit, they don't really understand, like, why do nonprofits always need money? Why do they why is philanthropy a thing? Why don't you just go have another luncheon or a gala? Um, there's a lot of work that goes into events, right? And the way nonprofits work is, you rarely get enough money to cover the services. You can't even be creative because you don't have money to be innovative or creative. You have enough just to pay. And God forbid you want to add a supervisor to really oversee these folks. There's no funding for that supervisor, right? So, or if you grow so big and you get all these contracts, now you need to add someone in your human resources department. Where's that money coming from? Right? Nobody wants to fund a human resources person or somebody else in your finance department. So it's complicated, and yeah, we haven't had to lay off in a very long time, but those are always things that could happen. But we do our best. We have a great philanthropy team. I'm out there, meeting people and networking, and we're very fortunate in our area to have a lot of amazing philanthropists, people that care deeply about children, and so we're fortunate. But there's never enough. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how things are going to shake out. So we just keep doing, and we've been around since the 1979. So we keep figuring it out somehow, and our budget's grown, and we continue to provide services all around the state of Florida. So we'll keep at it, and we'll do everything we can to keep it going.
And this is why I like to host the podcast, because when we can understand the realistic scenarios that leaders like you are having to overcome on a daily basis to be able to serve the community of people who truly need it, it helps us amplify this story and the good work that we're doing. And so, Kristie, I just want to say, for everybody who's been tuning in today, listening and watching, this conversation's been amazing. You've been able to not only provide so much value, you've helped me reflect on some of the things that are most important to me, but also by talking about the mission that you guys are on to change the relationships that these children have with their parents by creating a sense of awareness and accountability to help them recognize kind of a first principles perspective on why we react in certain situations is the best way, like you said, to get ahead of the problem and to impact 5 generations from now. And so for everybody who's tuning in, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you for all the work that you've done in your 30 years of serving this community. It means the world to everybody.
Thank you. It was an honor to be here. I love talking about it. So thank you so much. It was great.
Of course. Our last question for you came from a previous guest, and this is really interesting. I was talking to an individual, and she is a leader in Southern California, and the topic of discussion was about encouragement and support for leaders. Now, one of the things that often is very difficult for people who are CEOs, founders, presidents of organizations is we're often giving out support and encouragement to everybody else. So who is giving you the support and the encouragement that you need when you have some of your toughest days?
I have, it is very important for leaders of organizations at the highest level, like CEOs and executive directors, to have that, because it's not your board of directors necessarily. They're volunteers, and you can't go to people below you. I have an amazing group of local nonprofit CEOs, and we get together every month. I actually was with them this morning. That's probably why I'm in such a good mood. I feel so supported in those meetings because we can talk about things that everyone gets, and we absolutely support one another. It's a very tight, lovely group, and I recommend it. It was just put together, and we continue to do it because it's so important that we get together and support one another. So that's where and I can reach out to any one of them at any time and say, oh my gosh, or even ask questions like, how do you guys do this? So it's wonderful. That's where I get it. I mean, my husband's wonderful too, but he doesn't really get what it's like to be me. So
we get it. We understand. Well, once again, Kristie, I just want to say thank you for everybody who's tuning in and watching. You've done an amazing job at educating people on why the work that you do is so important, because you're getting ahead of the problem and you're impacting generations from now. And I just want to say thank you so much once again. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Keenan. It was great.
There we go. That's a wrap.